being braced by triangles on the back side, which in turn means the comb is braced by 3 cells on the back side. I was looking for something else and I found this photograph, and it's actually perfect. You see the 3 lines at the base of this cell. This triangle here is the edge of another cell going that way. This one,
sorry, can I just interrupt, Pete? Apparently you need to give us all permission to record, so I don't think anyone can record unless you do that on your side.
Okay, well I need to find out how to do that, so just bear with me. Shrink that. Meeting controls. Actually, I'm not seeing anything that's asking me for recording permission, which is a bit awkward.
Yeah, because if I press my record button, it comes up with please.
Yeah, I can understand that, but I'm not seeing where it allows you. Right, participants, manage participants. What else we got here? No, it's not under manage participants.
Can you right click on a particular participant and give that participant permission? I think there's only 1 or 2 that need to do it. In the picture.
Actually, no, because the only options are chat, stop videos, spotlight, make host, allow to multi-pin, rename, put in waiting room, remove report. So I can't see anywhere where it's asking for the recording permission.
Could you make me the host again, Pete, and then I could allow people to record?
Yep, hang on a minute.
And then I could try switching back.
I'll just need to find you. Okay, I've switched over now. Oh, technology, you gotta love it when it works. Odd. Okay, while we struggle with the recording aspect, as I say, I'm recording anyway, so hopefully that'll work. Can everybody see this bracing at the bottom of the cells? Can I get a thumbs up if you can see it? No? Yes. Okay, brilliant. And this is what gives the comb the incredible strength that it actually has. You'll remember I said that 1 pound of wax as comb will support 112 pounds of honey, and that is the simple reason of why that is possible. Ask any engineer, architect, what is the strongest form you can possibly have, and the answer should be, if they know their business, triangles. So that's that. Now, while I was looking for something else earlier on today, I came across this. I'd completely forgotten about it, to be honest, because it doesn't really form part of my beekeeping, but it is something that you need to be aware of. And that is apitherapy. And I came across it under a listing of 5 fads that basically don't work. So it's not for the faint-hearted. Used for thousands of years in traditional medicine, bee venom therapy is when the venom of a bee is administered to fight ailments. It's been making a comeback in recent years, with the likes of Gwyneth Paltrow and Victoria Beckham raving about its properties. Containing anti-inflammatory substances, it's said to help with the appearance of acne, arthritis, wrinkles, and alleviate the symptoms of multiple sclerosis. Little research has been done into the benefits of bee venom and the side effects, but there's not enough scientific evidence to support the above claims. Actor Gerald Butler almost died after having the therapy and going into anaphylactic shock. In Spain, a 55-year-old woman wasn't so lucky and died during an apitherapy session. So be aware, please, and I'm not punning here, that when people develop really bad reactions to bees, expressing anaphylactic shock or lesser symptoms, there are desensitization courses on the NHS. The Scottish one, I believe, is run in Dundee. But when they do that, they have full-blown crash teams on standby. So if somebody does go into anaphylactic shock, they have the people and the expertise there to deal with it. Something that you and I, in the comfort of our homes, certainly don't. So just if somebody says to you, oh, you're starting to keep bees, great, could I borrow a few and get myself stung? The answer is no. Wise up. Right, having said all of that, today we are going to look at some basic colony manipulations. And the biggest danger the bees face is every time you put your makeup on, every time you have a shave, it's you. And it's not that you set out to be a danger, it's just sometimes you, especially when you're starting out, things get a little bit irresistible. Oh, it won't matter if I just. If you find yourself saying that, I want you to think about this. Carrots. The most successful carrot is the one that's left in the ground. Insatiable curiosity. I wonder what the bees are doing. I wonder if they've progressed. Well, every time you disturb the colony, you're setting it back. Probably by a day, give or take. And every time you're guddling about in the bees, you're increasing the risk of accidentally squashing that queen. And that's something you really don't want to do, because that is a major setback. So, newbies have this obsession. It's the only way I can describe it. And I've been there, you know, I've been there, I'll admit. I have to see the Queen. I have to see the Queen. Well, you know, if you're that desperate, take a train down to London, queue outside Buckingham Palace. You don't need to see the Queen at all. Except, sometimes I've gone a year without seeing a Queen in a colony because I've had no reason to actually look for her. Bias. Brood in all stages is what that acronym stands for. Brood in all stages. So that's eggs, larvae, sealed brood. If it's there and you've got eggs, you don't need to see the Queen because she is providing you with point blank evidence she's alive and well, she's laying like a train, and thank you very much. Leave her to get on with it and she'll oblige. But if you start chasing around the hive, You could put her off egg laying for 3-4 days, and you don't want that, because she could be laying as much as 1,500, 2,000 eggs a day. Now remember, you've got to have that egg laying rate for the colony to increase in size, because the other side of that coin is you've got the old codger still dying off. There are 2 times when you need to find her. One is swarming, and the other is in spring if it's a new queen and you want to mark and or clip her. In actual fact, what I've just said isn't quite right. The only time you really need to find her is when you see evidence that the colony is thinking about swarming. The clipping and marking is optional. Nobody says you have to do it, but it is a very handy thing to do. And having mentioned clipping and marking, I'm just going to have a wee chat about the whys, the wherefores and the dangers. Marking the queen means putting a little dab of paint in the middle of her thorax, and you get marking pens. They look a bit like indelible pens, but they're like spray cans. They've got a little ball inside them, so you give them a shake, it goes rattle, rattle, rattle. You take off the top, and the top will tell you what the colour of paint is inside. And what I do is I find a bit of scrap wood or a bit of scrap paper or something that's not going to matter, and I just touch the pen to the paper, and I make sure I'm not going to get a flood of paint coming out of it, because all you want is a neat little dot. Now, there is an official chart. There's an acronym that will tell you what colour is official for the particular year. If you subscribe to the Scottish Beekeeper, the front cover of the magazine is the colour the queens ought to be marked that year. However, many years ago I went for a job with what was then British Rail, and there was about 6 guys in front of me in the waiting room. So I dutifully sat there with my paper. Chappie number 1 went in, 10 minutes later he came out. Chappie number 2 went in, 5 minutes later he came out. 3 went in, he was out in about 3 minutes. 4 went in, 5 went in, same result. In and out 3 minutes. I went in, and the chap said to me, "Now, before we do anything else," he said, "I don't even want a real name. What is the number on that book?" And it was a red-green colour chart for colour blindness. You wouldn't credit this. All the guys that had been in and out were all either red or green or both colourblind. And for a guard's position in the British Rail, it wasn't the best of conditions to have, really. Can you see green to go? No. Can you see red for danger? No. Oops. Bang. Yes. Anyway, so given that colour blindness is not that uncommon, I think it's a little bit unfortunate that 2 of the colours on the official colour chart are red and green. Oilseed rape is not quite so common as it used to be, but still, yellow, when you've got a hive that is heaving with bees with yellow pollen on them, is not the greatest of colours. White is not too bad, but if you go to the heather where there's lots of grey pollen floating about, white's not too handy either. So personally, I spend quite a lot of time using blue, to be honest. Getting back to actually painting the queen, you get things, they're queen catching cages, and they're shaped sort of like that, and they spring like this. The idea is that you sort of plant it against the comb and let go gently. The jaws come in and trap the queen. All very fine and well, but you've still somehow got to open it with one hand and get a hold of the queen with the other. Bit awkward. You also get things called crown of thorns, circular. They've got a mesh hatch over the top. You plonk it down over the queen. The gaps between the pins that secure it to the comb are wide enough to allow worker bees to escape, and you can mark the queen through the mesh. The trouble is you need to push it in far enough to hold the queen. Now, combs can be a bit funny. Some of them can be tough as old boots, and ones that look like they should be tough as old boots are in actual fact really quite soft. What I was saying is it's a real danger if you push the crown of thorns in too firmly. You can chop your queen into three very easily. So what I suggest you do is learn to catch drones. And being right-handed, I have my pen and my bits and bobs on my right, and I use my left hand, forefinger and thumb, nice and quietly up to the unsuspecting insect, and I grab the wing. Mark your drone, kill it. Catch your next one, mark it, kill it. If you can't bring yourself to kill it, get somebody else to do it, but for goodness sake, don't put it back in the hive. Because otherwise you're going to have, if Sod's Law works out as it usually does, you won't find the queen to mark her during that session, and you'll have 40 odd drones marching round with pretty blue backs, which is not really what you're aiming for. So practice and kill. When it comes to actually catching the queen, when you pluck up the courage to try it, grab her by the wing and just wait, because she will want to twist round. But she'll only twist so far, she'll settle. Once she's settled, pen, dab, on her back, job's done. Nice and easy. Supersedure is a condition where the bees realise the queen is somehow damaged or she's coming to the end of her working life, and they will set about raising new virgins to replace her. And you can actually have two queens working side by side for quite a considerable length of time. I knew a bee farmer who almost had a punch up with his son because they both announced that they had the queen, and they did, and both queens were marked, and that's how they knew by the colours that that supersedure had been ongoing for over 18 months. So when I say quite a considerable length of time, that just puts it in perspective. I mean, I'm not saying that is common, it's probably highly uncommon, but it can happen. So, having discussed marking, what about clipping? Well, why clip? It's to buy you a little bit of time, probably 3 days if we're honest. On swarming, a clipped queen is lost in the grass, usually, as nothing's ever guaranteed. The swarm returns and will leave with the first virgin to hatch. This buys you time only. It is not swarm prevention. Swarm prevention does not exist. And if somebody tries to tell you it does, they may well believe it, but they're talking absolute nonsense. When you clip, you've already got hold of the queen because you're marking her. Pick up your scissors, get ready to slide them under the wing, and wait. Just wait 2-3 seconds. Because for some reason, when the wing, although the wing has got no nerves in it whatsoever, there is no sensation in her wing, somehow she feels the blade of the scissors and she will bring up a leg, usually the middle leg, to do this. And if she's doing that as you're going snip, you're back into your super seizure situation again. And people will tell you that clipping queens drives them to super seizure. Actually, no. I've never known a clipped queen, in all honesty, to be superseded, but if you've chopped off one of her middle legs, I can guarantee you they're going to supersede. It's clumsy beekeepers what do the damage. Now then, let's go to the point from which the vast majority of people set sail on their beekeeping careers. And that is, they put their hands in their pockets and they buy a nucleus of bees. What is a nucleus of bees for a start? There is actually a legal standard, and prior to the polystyrene nucleus hives coming on the market, a standard nucleus box took 5 frames. The legal standard hasn't caught up with 6 and 7 frame nuke boxes. So a 5 frame nucleus should have at least 3 frames of brood. There should be bias, brood in all stages. There should be an active queen, and there should not be any disease. There should be some stores, both honey or syrup stores, and pollen. In other words, it should be a healthy miniature colony. And you've seen a bargain, the classic bargain, and you've bought it because you couldn't resist, because it was 20 pence cheaper than Jimmy down the road. And in your innocence, you have all national equipment sitting ready to go, but you bought yourself a Langstroth nucleus and it won't fit. Now don't laugh, this happens every year without fail. Somebody drops the proverbial clanger. Is it a disaster? No. Because I'm going to tell you how to get round it. An adapter plate, also known as a board with a hole. But adapter plate sounds so much more technical, and you could probably stick an extra 15 quid on the price. The hole comes free, of course. Right, how does this work? Okay, your nucleus is on the bottom, and the nucleus can be any size, shape, whatever. It doesn't actually matter. Provided it's in a box with a flat surface, this will work. The board is the same size as whatever equipment you want the bees to go to. So if that's a Langstroth nucleus, that board is going to be 460 by 460, which is the national dimension. And your hole. So you put your national brood box on top of the board, you put the crown board on, and you put the roof on, but no floor. The brood box is directly above the nucleus. Now I'm going to let you into a little beekeeping truism here. Bees, I always say, are vertically challenged. They want to go up. They see up as a tremendous thing to do. They like climbing. That is why you put the arrangement the way I have it. Nuke in the bottom, the new brood box on the top. To make things easier for the nuke, you could put some insulation boards into the national, so that you've only got, let's say, 3 frames of foundation directly above the hole. Just makes it that bit warmer. And when the queen is up and laying, you slide in an excluder over the board, but between the board and the bottom of the national brood box. After 3-4 days, you go back and you have a quick look and make sure you've got fresh eggs in the brood box. If you don't, you take out the excluder, put it back together, wait another 3-4 days and try again. But at some point you will trap the queen in your new brood box. Then it's just a case of giving them a little less insulation, another couple of sheets of foundation, and in 3 weeks time, because the workers are 21 days to hatch, aren't they? 3, 5, 8, yeah. All the combs in the nuke will be empty, and you will then be able to recycle them up into your brood box, because it saves the bees having to pull out all the foundation. And put your brood box onto a floor, and that's you set up ready to go. And that is how you get round buying the wrong size of nucleus. It's also useful if, for instance, you go to a bee auction and you buy a Smith, but you want to run them in nationals, or you buy a national and you want to run them in Langstroth. Exactly the same thing works. It's a painless way of switching them over. The only difference in that case being that, having got the bees off the wrong size of frame for you, those frames are surplus. But on the other hand, they do make very good firelighters. So that's that one. Now, having bought the right size of nucleus, hopefully the person that you buy it from will supply you with a nucleus that is fit to travel. Be aware that when a bee colony of any size is shut in, there is an excitement, and that excitement generates a blast of heat. And really, you should have ventilation over the top of the nucleus to allow that heat to escape. It's just something to be aware of. But if you're buying a nucleus from a competent seller, they will have allowed for that with the way that their nukes are made. So, having got it home, put it on the site where your hive is going to be. Bees locate to within 3 feet of the hive door, or 914.4 millimeters to be exact. This can either be useful or it can be an issue, because the other side of that 3 feet coin is actually 3 miles traditionally. It's one of the rules of thumb. There is a way round it, but the rule of thumb is this: you either move bees less than 3 feet because of that location, or you move them more than 3 miles. Why 3 miles? Well, classically they fly out from the hive and they range over, really at the maximum, about 1.5 miles. If you move them 3 miles, they won't find their old flight paths and return to where the hive used to be. Okay? And this is important, because if you move them 500 or 600 yards without taking the right precautions, you'll end up with a pile of very bemused and somewhat annoyed bees at the site of where the hive used to be, instead of going back to where you want them to go, which is where you've plonked the hive. However, it can be useful in that if you have two nukes in an apiary, and one is kind of struggling to build up and another one is beginning to get too full, beginning to burst at the seams, a very simple trick, and it obviously it's only a trick you use if you are 100% confident you have no disease issues. You swap them places, because the strong colony will lose its foragers to the weak one will lose its foragers to the strong one, but they've got so few that doesn't actually matter. But you give the weak one a tremendous boost of worker bees, and by crikey, in a week's time you'll hardly recognise that that was a weak nuke. It'll take off like a scalded cat. So that's a couple of little dodges that you can use. When you get your nuke home and the weather isn't too clever, put it either on top of where the hive is or put it alongside. And when I say alongside, I mean virtually resting against it, not 20 feet away, because then you're going to have issues that we've just talked about regarding the 3-foot rule. Okay? So don't just think you can put a nucleus down anywhere and sort it out later. You've got to put some thought into it. Otherwise you're just making a problem for yourself. Now then, this is actually doing the business. It's a bonny day, it's warm, and it's not too windy. You open your hive, not the nucleus, the hive, and take out all the frames which are fitted with foundation apart from one. You put that one frame next to a side inside the hive. You gently smoke your nuke, and that's 2-3 puffs of smoke, not, working the bellows like you're trying to rescue a dead bonfire. Gently smoke it, open up, so roof off, crown board off if it's got one, and take the first comb and put it next to your foundation, and then you repeat. So the combs are now in the same order as they were in the nucleus, but they are now in the hive body. And then add in the foundation that you took out to start with, frames of foundation. So if you have a national and you've put in a 5-frame nucleus, you will have 6 foundation and 5 drawn combs, making a total of 11. Now, a lot of people, including myself, when a nucleus has been hived, I think it's a good idea to give them a little feed. And when I say little, I mean little, about half a pint. So this is where a frame feeder is a very useful piece of kit to have. It is exactly what it says it is. It's a feeder that takes about 3 pints of syrup. It has the same dimensions as a Hoffman self-spacing frame, and it will come with a float, but it doesn't do any harm to add some twigs or a bit of straw to help avoid the bees drowning in the syrup. Given that this will be your first experience of bees, nobody's expecting you to be able to make value judgments about stores. So for your peace of mind and the benefit of the bees, a feed of pure white sugar diluted 1:1, so that's a pound of sugar in a pint of water, or a kilo of sugar in a litre of water, and then half fill the feeder, as you want them to build comb, not store syrup. But they will use the syrup because it is 1:1, it's quite dilute. They'll use it for the water content, and they'll use the sugar to produce more brood. I'm not sure if in the video we're about to see if Stuart talks about supering and a bit of a dilemma. Personally, I think feeding a nucleus will have no impact whatsoever on contaminating a honey super with sugar. And let's be honest, at the end of the day, when you get that first drop of honey, you're not going to be selling it through a shop. It's going to be going down your own good neck, or it's going to be going to friends and family, because you are going to be proud as punch of your first honey. And trust me, there is no other honey in the world that tastes as good as the first honey from your own bees. How do I know? Because mine was. Right, we've just mentioned the supering business, so I will get the video set up with a bit of luck. Just excuse me while I get the sound organised.
See, I just made you the host again, but then I think that stopped the recording.
Ah.
So I might have to go back
Well,
to being...
if you want to keep the host yourself, that'll keep the recording issue sorted.
Yeah, can you make me the host again? Or can I... Oh, I don't know, can I take the host off?
Here we go.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, can you make me the host again?
No, you stay as host, and then that'll keep the recording issue sorted, hopefully.
I don't know how to get back from you though.
Right, here we go.
Hi, I'm Stuart from the Norfolk Honey Company, and today we've returned to our allotment apiary where we've got our getting started hive. We've just set up a nucleus colony here. You'll remember that from our previous videos, and today the sun's shining and we've decided to come up and move the nuke into its full-size hive. It's a straightforward process, but there's just a couple of things that you need to bear in mind when you're doing it. So we'll get the camera set up down on the nuke and we'll talk you through how you transfer your nuke into a full-size hive. Okay, so for this you're going to need a smoker and your hive tool, and the first step is to lift
we're not seeing the video, we're hearing it, but not
where
seeing
we've
it.
had it sitting for the last week, and pop it onto the floor.
I keep forgetting about this, going to change the yeah. There we go. Is that showing now?
Yeah, that's it now.
Yeah, okay, here we go then.
Started hive. We've just set up a nucleus colony here. You'll remember that from our previous videos, and today the sun's shining and we've decided to come up and move the nuke into its full-size hive. It's a straightforward process, but there's just a couple of things that you need to bear in mind when you're doing it. So we'll get the camera set up down on the nuke and we'll talk you through how you transfer your nuke into a full-size hive. Okay, so for this you're going to need a smoker and your hive tool, and the first step is to lift the nuke box off the stand where we've had it sitting for the last week and pop it onto the floor. Okay, and then we'll just give them a little bit of smoke, and then we can set up the hive on its new stand. So we have the floor, and a brood box. Remember to point the floor in the same direction as the entrance of the nuke, and then we're going to remove frames out of the middle. We've got 11 frames of foundation here. And so we've got 5 frames in here and 6 frames left in the brood box, and we're going to transfer the frames from the nuke box into the hive. Okay, so we've got our nuke here and our new hive here, and what we need to remember more than anything else is that we want to keep the frames in the same order that they come out of the nuke. So give them a light smoke across the top. So just to illustrate that, what I'll do is I'll just write some numbers on the top of the bars. So 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. And so we're going to transfer them in that order into the full-size hive. And it gives us an opportunity to have a quick inspection as well. And also have a quick look for the queen. Lots of really good brood on this frame, and this side is full as well, so that's a really good sign. And there's lots of bees out flying today, so now is a good time to transfer them because you won't have quite so many bees in the nuke box. Again, lots of brood, and that's all going to emerge over the coming weeks. There's no need to rush, you can take your time with it. And they're looking really healthy. And last but not least, number 5. And this one's actually just been stuck to the side wall, so we'll just give that a bit of smoke and then we can ease that away from the side wall. Okay, and then a quick look inside the box to see if we can see the queen here. No sign of the queen in there, so the next thing to do is to just take, if you've got a nuke box that comes apart, just lift the top box away and then just shake the bees out of the box into their new home. And then the remaining bees that you have on the floor can also be shaken in and just brushed off gently. And then we're going to just slide these frames together, and we'll bring the camera in so that you can just see how we've got these positioned. Everyone's been transferred across, and here you can see the frames are in exactly the same order as they were in the nuke, and that's important so that we don't get any bees being crushed between wax comb that might be slightly raised on each of the faces of the frames that we've got here. So what remains for us to do now is to get the crime board on, and really importantly is to get some food into them, so we're going to feed them with some sugar syrup. Okay, so we've got the crime board to go on top, and then we've got a small feeder which is a 4-pint feeder, and we can pop that over the top, and then we've got some sugar syrup for this, which is 1:1 sugar syrup, so it's equal quantities of sugar and water. And we top this up and then position it above the feed hole just to remove that bee. And then the other tip for today is to just dribble some of the sugar syrup down the centre, and that will encourage the bees to feed on it and bring them up into the feeder. And with this feeder you've got a lid that you can take off and watch the bees feeding without the bees coming through the feeder and being in your way. So you can top the feeder up actually without being suited up. You can come along, take the roof off and have a look to see how much feed they've got, and then top it up as you need to. So we'll just pop that lid on so the bees don't get caught in there. And then we've also got some pollen substitute that we've been feeding the bees, and we're going to pop that over this second hole. And this is the leftover pollen substitute that we were feeding them previously, so that can go over the second hole, and we've now got them well established and ready to go. It's a very straightforward task. All you need to remember is to make sure that the frames go into the new hive in the order that they come out of the nuke, so that you don't crush any bees on the face of the frames. And don't forget to give them a good feed, because they've now got 6 new frames in there that they need to draw. It's all foundation, and so we want them to draw that as quickly as they possibly can. I hope that was of use to you. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and once you've subscribed you'll see there's a small little bell symbol that you can click, which will notify you of all future videos that we're releasing. This Getting Started series is coming out on a Wednesday evening, and we've also got our Beekeeping Basics on a Sunday, and as of a week or two's time we'll have our new videos coming out on a Friday, which will feature our Maysmore poly apiary, so I'm looking forward to showing you that. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up, and if you're new to beekeeping, head over to Facebook and check out our Facebook group, which is called Stuart's Beekeeping Basics, and there we've got a lot of people that are now helping each other with lots of tips and techniques, and also helping with questions that beginners are asking.
Nick, could you make me the host again, and then I can start recording again?
Right you are.
Sorry, between us, we're not the most techie combination, but we'll get there.
Okay, that's you hosted.
Okay, cheers.
Now you'll have noticed a couple of differences between what I've been telling you and what Stuart just did there. The first thing, and this is not a criticism because obviously that was a filmed situation, but he lifted off that crown board. He didn't look at it, the underside of it, the side that was in contact with the bees. He picked it up, he moved it, and he put it down on the floor. When you take a crown board off, especially if it's off a brood box, it doesn't matter if you're taking it off supers because the queen shouldn't be up there. But if you're taking a crown board off a colony which does not have supers, you always look at the underside of that crown board because the queen might just be walking across it. Yeah? Just bear in mind, you always check your crown board and you lay it down so that the top side is on the ground and the underside is facing up, just in case that the queen is there and you didn't see her. It's all about minimizing risk to the queen. So that was the hiving, and I'm going to introduce you to a technique that a lot of people say is something that you really shouldn't do. And the reason they say it's something that you shouldn't do is because that is what they were taught. And the person that taught them has probably never even tried it. Earlier in the year, I was telling people about this, and I got shouted down a few times, which was quite comical. The people that did actually do it came back to me a week later and says, "Wow, you're right, this works." I says, "Yes, I know it works." So, you've put your 5 into the colony, 5 frames. Now that nucleus was not a particularly strong nucleus. There was 3 and a bit frames of brood. So I wouldn't try to push them at that level. They're just not strong enough. When they're up to 4 good frames of brood, and you saw Stuart saying that frame was a good frame of brood, I mean it was virtually solid brood. When you've got 4 good frames and they're on the 5th, then you can start being a little bit more creative with them. Given that there are, right, we're at 6 frames of brood, so this is a safe level to start experimenting. Open up number 3 and number 4 and put in a frame of foundation. Now, some people will say that's splitting the brood, which I suppose it is technically, and other people will say you're spreading the brood, which again it is. The following week you will find that that frame has been drawn and laid up. Provided there are a decent number of bees in the nuke and that frame is well covered, you can do the same again. And if you keep adding the foundation in like that, before you know it, you're going to have 8 frames of brood. It doesn't take long. And once you've got 8 frames of brood, you are at a point where the colony is getting quite strong, building up nicely, and you have a couple of decisions to make. If anybody's got questions about adding the foundation, we'll stop I think a little bit early tonight and we'll have a question and answer session. Keeping track of what you're doing with one colony is relatively straightforward, but when you start to have 2 or 3 it gets a little bit more complicated. So I want to spend a little bit of time discussing records. Information is power. So where and when do you need the information? A lot of people, especially when they start out, they seem to record absolutely everything. There are people who take photographs of each side of their frames. This is a personal opinion and is based on technical thinking, really. I don't like this business about taking photographs and videoing and all the rest of it, because the tech is distracting from the beekeeping. And more importantly, using the tech slows the inspection down. It makes the inspection last longer. And the longer you have the hive open, the more distress you're causing to the colony, the further you're setting them back, which is self-defeating. And it just instinctively, to me, it feels wrong to prolong an inspection unnecessarily. And the other thing is, where and when do you need the information about your colony? Well, to my mind, you don't really need it so much in the house. You need it when you're inspecting the colony. And for that reason, I have always kept my record card on the crown board. And before I even lift the roof, I know roughly the status of the colony. Now, how do I manage that? Because I ain't psychic, I can assure you. All my colonies have got bricks on them. Bog standard, grey, building brick. They're about 20 pence each, thereabouts. And that brick tells me, initially, is the colony alive or is the colony dead? If the colony's dead, the brick is sitting parallel with the entrance. If the colony is alive, the brick is at right angles to the entrance. So, if my brick is sitting that way and the entrance is facing me, it's dead. If the brick is that way, it tells me the colony is alive. If it's on its end, upright, it tells me the last time I was in, something wasn't right with that colony and it's needing attention. And that's the three basics. If you paint your bricks, when I was doing a lot of queen rearing, I had blue bricks, I had yellow bricks, and I had red bricks. And the red brick told me that there were grafts inside the colony. The yellow told me that there were queen cells in the colony, and the blue one told me that there was virgins in the colony. And all those bricks stood upright. So I walked into the bees, and without lifting a lid, I could see, okay, cells there, virgins there, dia, and that's information straight into the brain box. And that information is no use to me sitting in the house. I want it in the apiary, but that's me. So why do we need to keep records? We need to know when we're next due to inspect the colony. And there are the Ted Hooper, who wrote the famous A Guide to Bees and Beekeeping, a book that I thoroughly recommend to you. 5 questions that you should ask every inspection. Does the queen have enough room to lay? Do the workers have enough room to store nectar and pollen? In other words, is there enough space for the colony to develop? Eggs. Is the queen present and laying? Are there eggs, and or have you seen the queen? Development. Is the colony building up as you expect? Are there queen cells? Are the bees healthy? Do they have disease? Can you see mites on the bees? Any signs of foul brood, chalk brood, DWV, which is a virus, etc., etc. Stores. Does the colony have enough stores until the next inspection? And it also can be used to remind us what equipment to take to the apiary. For instance, do you need extra supers or clearer boards or a smaller entrance block? Even if you have a great memory, it's always good to have a written record. It isn't too hard when you only have the one hive, but when you have a few, it can easily just blur into a mystery as to what was what in which hive. Also, if you fall ill or if you've gone off on holiday, somebody else will have the information to inspect your bees. If you really feel that you need to have your hive information in the house, the simple thing to do is to write out the record card on the bees, on the hive, and then take a photograph, and you've got the best of both worlds. Something here, yes, what equipment to take the apiary, extra supers or clearer boards. Now, I always have a stack of extra kit at the apiary. When it's the active season and the bees are moving really quite quickly, I don't want to go down there and think, oh, I could really do with 3 or 4 extra supers here because the bees need them. Because they don't need them tomorrow, they need them there and then. And that is why I take a load of supers down. I use a spare roof, a spare floor, or even clearer boards as roofs and floors, and I keep that stack of equipment right beside the bees. It's ready to hand. I've worked like that always, ever since I got well caught out and I found myself running back and forth from the house to the sites and thinking, eventually the penny dropped. I thought, this is just stupid. I'll just take a whole load of kit down and I've got it if I need it. Saves a lot of time. Now, you'll find there are record cards that you can download and print off. Somebody's already done the thinking for you. Date of visit, queen cells, brood, stores, room, health, varroa, temper, feed, supers, weather, and notes. I mean, look at the space for weather. I mean, in Britain, for goodness sake, you need an A4 sheet for the weather alone. This is the BBKA, British Beekeepers Association, which is, of course, actually the English Beekeepers Association, but of course they have to call themselves British, although they're not. They don't like it when I tell them that. It's there. Is it particularly brilliant? Not really. It can get worse though. Right. Sample beekeeping inspection checklist. I suspect that is actually meant to read simple. And it goes on in the same vein. General higher appearance. I presume that means hive appearance. Are the bees actively entering and exiting the hive? What's changed since the last inspection? Well, I mean, look, you've got a diddy little box for what's changed. How on earth, it's just not practical. Reproduction. Is the queen present, or are there signs of her presence? Look for brood in capped and uncapped cells. Is there 1 egg or larvae per cell? Etc, etc, etc. In my thoughts, pretty useless. And just to really horrify you, I'm going to show you the system that I use. You ready?
Pete, I just want to flag up the time. It's just gone 4, so I don't know if you want to take a break or just go straight through.
Hang on a minute. Is anybody else wanting a break? We'll take 5.
Okay, I've
I'll get myself a fresh coffee, I think.
cool. Okay, dokes. I've stopped the recording then.
Okay. As I thought, I better stop mine. Right. This is my record card. KISS, by the way, is keep it simple silly. Is how I operate. So at the top of the card is the queen, her date that she came into action, which was this year, 2020. B/C, blue, and C for clipped. So she's marked and clipped, okay? 10/5, date. Nuke, hived, okay, +1. Now, the OK actually stands for a lot of things. Have they got enough space? Yes, they're okay. Is the queen all right? Yes, she's okay. Is there any disease? No, so that's okay. In other words, OK covers all the normal questions. Are they healthy? Have they got enough space? Is the queen okay? Is there anything abnormal? All covered by those two letters, because that is all that is required in my view. So a week down the line, the +1 is however many frames of brood you had at that point. I added a frame of foundation or a comb into the middle of that brood nest to expand it. A week down the line, 6 + 1, okay. There is 6 frames of brood. I've stuck another frame in the middle of those 6, and okay, self-explanatory. A week down the line, 7 + 1, okay. 8 + 1, second brood box on, okay. 8 + 1 will be 9 frames of brood next time round, so second brood box. Now what I do when I add that second brood box is I take a couple of frames of brood and I put them in the bottom box, because the brood box that I add goes underneath, not on top, underneath. If you put it on top, the bees will start using it as a super. They'll start storing honey in it. You don't want that. You want them producing brood that goes down below. And the following week is 11 + 2, because they now have 20 combs to play with, because I've got 10 combs in each of my poly brood boxes. And there is a super on, okay. And then it goes on and on and on. Now, that is all the information, personally, that I need. Works for me. And I have produced over 20 tons of honey on the backs of that system. So it's tried and tested. It works, people. That's as simple as it gets. Taken right back to bare bones. It's a far cry from taking photographs of every frame, but it works. Right then. Feeding your new colony, when do you stop? I personally would take the frame feeder out at 7 frames of brood and replace that with foundation. At that strength, they really shouldn't need feeding unless the weather is absolutely abysmal. If you do have to keep feeding, again, it's just little dribbles, suppies, not pints and pints and pints, otherwise they'll end up stores bound, which means there's not enough space for the queen to lay. It's a balancing act. Too far one way is as bad as too far the other, but that comes unfortunately with experience. To be honest, do I feed nukes? Normally I don't, and that's from making them up, putting in queen cells, so on and so forth. I mean, my nukes start from absolute scratch. They're not queen right nukes that the same as you would buy, but I have one eye on the weather all the time. I keep an eye on the stores situation, and I know when they need feeding. It just so happens that so far it hasn't actually cropped up yet. There's possibly been a couple of times when they might have benefited from a feed, but I've thought, you know what, I'll chance it another week, and it's paid off. Because I mean, at the end of the day, when you're feeding 20 odd nukes, that suppy per nuke adds up to actually quite a few kilos of sugar, and that costs. Right, supering. what is supering? It's adding space above the brood nest for honey storage. Typically, a super is 50% of the brood box by volume. So if you're adding a super, you're increasing that hive space by 50%. Normally, there is a queen excluder between the brood box and the super. When it comes to your supering, obviously it's all going to be foundation. You'll find that the bees will draw out the foundation that is directly above the brood area before they'll draw out the frames that are at the sides. So although you're not going to exercise a +1 system, you can judiciously move drawn or partly drawn frames away from the middle and put your foundation in its place, so that gradually your drawn comb is heading towards the sides and your undrawn foundation is in the warmest spot in the middle until you get everything drawn. Normally you are using wired foundation in the super, and after you extract honey, provided that you do it gently, and freshly drawn combs do need to be treated gently with a capital G, your combs are reusable. They're not one-trick ponies. You'll be able to put drawn comb back in the supers, back on top of the bees, year after year after year, provided you treat it with respect. So, we were feeding a nuke a second ago, so how do we now need a super? Well, you hived your nuke on week 1, and then 6 of brood week 2. I was assuming that we're starting with 5 frames of brood in the nuke, which is actually a little unlikely. It's more likely to be 3 or 4, but gives you an idea of how fast things can happen. So 6 week 2, 7 week 3, 8 if not 9 at week 4. This is how fast they can move. And I would suggest to you that you super on 8 frames of brood. Don't fall into this trap of saying, oh, they look really strong, I'll put on a super. You need numbers, because what looks really strong at 2 o'clock in the afternoon could look, quite frankly, fairly pathetic at 2 o'clock in the morning, because the bees have contracted in to cover their brood and they're not nearly as spread out, you know, which gave you the impression that they're really powerful in the first place. So 7 frames of brood, do you want to super? Do you know what? I would just hang fire to that 8th. When it's 8, then you're in safe country. So on your 8, so you'll need to have your super and your queen excluder ready at that point to put on. Now we'll just have a little discussion about queen excluders. There's basically 3 types, and they obviously cost different amounts of money. I use the unframed, really cheap plastic ones, and mine are beginning to get a bit past their best, but I've had a good 10 years out of them, so they don't actually owe me anything. Then you get the unframed punched metal ones. People do say they're roughing the bees and they lose wings and goodness knows what else besides, but I can't say I've seen any evidence to back that up. And then the more expensive, or the most expensive, are the framed wire ones, sometimes called Waldron excluders. But the bee space can be wrong. So you pays your money, you takes your choice. I would suggest you start off with the plastic or the metal. Possibly even the metal to start with, because lifting the plastic ones off a hive that produces a lot of propolis can be a little challenging, and for newbies, knowing how much force can be safely applied is a bit of an art. So maybe the punched metal one is possibly the best one to go with to start with. Some people will tell you that they're not queen excluders, they are honey excluders. It's a point of view. I don't agree with it. I find if the bees aren't going up into the super, it's either the foundation is rubbish or the bees just aren't quite strong enough. It's as simple as that. So the first issue is getting bees into the super. In poly, they tend to not be reluctant about it because it is nice and cozy up there, because it's warmer for the bees. Quality foundation helps, as does narrow spacing, as that's warmer for them as well. Now, good foundation. I'm going to name drop here. Over the years, I've tried foundation from various people, and then I found the guy I'm going to tell you in a minute, and I gave up buying from anybody else. He's not a well-known supplier. He doesn't do a lot of advertising. He's called Kemble Bee Supplies, K-E-M-B-L-E, or KBS, Kemble Bee Supplies, and he supplies the most beautiful foundation. And if your bees won't go up to draw Kemble foundation, then I would suggest to you they are not strong enough. Now, the thing about supers, you need more than one. So, once your bees are working away merrily in the super and the bees are covering, let's say, 3/4 of the combs in the super, and the combs are getting nice and fat, they're being drawn out, the super's getting heavier, it's time to add super number 2. Now, the research says that by adding space above the brood nest, it stimulates the colony to collect more nectar. In other words, the research says if you put the empty super below the filling up super, it stimulates the colony to get a move on. But if you put it underneath your full super, in order to see how the bees are getting on in the new super, you've got to move the full super. And the full super is now weighing £20 plus and getting heavier by the day, hopefully. And if you've got a number of colonies, that's a lot of weight you have to move to check on what's going on. So personally, I put mine on top. I'm willing to forego that extra stimulation, which may or may not make a massive difference, I don't know, because I can then roof off, crown board off. That's what's happening. I don't have to move that extra super. Again, it's a judgment call. You might think, well, if the stimulation is provoked by having the empty space, I'm going to have the extra effort out of the colony and I'll put it underneath the full one. So to help things along, you can put a couple of the partly filled combs into your new super, and then obviously you fill the gaps with frames of foundation out the new super, and then you work your combs the same as we discussed earlier for the first super. In other words, as they fill them, move them towards the edges and put foundation into the warmest spot in the middle. I didn't mention that you actually need 3 supers, did I? But unfortunately you do. Why do you need 3? Because it's extra cost, it's hassle, and I really don't like you now because you're costing me money. It's really dead simple. When you clear bees out of supers, let's be logical about this, they have to go somewhere. They can't be forced into the brood box because it's already pretty busy with bees. So that's why you need the third super. You clear your 2 full ones into the third one, which is empty. And in this instance, the empty super has to go on top of the brood box because you're clearing the bees down from the 2 supers you're going to take home and extract. Now then, when do you decide that you are going to take these supers off? Well, the obvious answer is when they're full. But it's like every obvious answer, it's possibly not as obvious as you might think. Have they capped over all the frames? Well, yes they have. Okay, that's fine. We can go. Have the bees got the water content of the honey right before they capped over the cells? Don't know. Some colonies aren't as particular as others about the water content when it comes to the capping point. So, there's your answer. You buy a refractometer, which are hugely expensive. Wish, sub 10 quid. I saw one the other day. In actual fact, I should have prepared this earlier, I suppose. Here we go. This is a refractometer, very nicely packaged. And it has a flap that lifts back, and that black bit at the bottom, the chisely looking bit, is the business end. You put a smear of honey on there, you close the flap, you look through the eyepiece at a strong light, and it tells you the percentage of water that's in the honey. It takes the guesswork out of it. These things used to cost a small fortune. I mean, I'm talking, I think back in the day they were over 100 quid. Now the cheapest chips. There's really no excuse for not having one. And then, going back to knowledge is power, you do know for definite that your honey is safe to extract. Ideally, less than 21%, and preferably around about 18%. So, you put the empty super on, you then put on a clearer board, and then your full supers on top of the clearer board, and the following day your bees will have left and gone down. Why do they go down? They don't like being cut off from the queen. It's all to do with queen substance again. When you take your supers to wherever you're going to extract, just be aware that they might not be 100% empty. There'll probably be a couple of stragglers. They will always fly to the light. And if you leave your bulbs off, then they will fly to a window. You can open the window, shoo them out, and they will return to the hive. This is one of my clearer boards. It's not the prettiest looking object, I fully agree. There are a couple of things wrong with it, which I must get round to remedying. The rim is not as deep as it could be. It's probably best to have that rim 25mm or an inch deep. Just gives that little bit more room for the bees to occupy when they're coming down. This is the underside, if you like. That's the discharge point there. So the bees are coming the opposite side, There are holes there, and that is an 8mm hole. Now this actually started life, if you can imagine that this end and that end were together. They were glued together. It was one piece, but I cut it in half with a saw because theoretically this is supposed to be deployed over a central hole. I was taught many years ago that the bees tend to go round a perimeter, almost like cattle running around the fence of a field. So my holes are in the corners. This cost pennies to make, to be honest. Now, in the video that we watched earlier, there were 2 porter-hole bee escapes in the crown board. Fair enough, he uses them for feeding. I can't be doing with them. I can't be doing with holes in my crown boards, full stop. They'll let heat out. Now this is your porter bee escape. That's the top, that's the bottom, and that's the working part inside. And these are very fine metal springs, and they need to be set. If they're not set right, then the bees propolis them. Why don't I like them? Moving parts, think propolis. They need setting, think fiddle. Drones, too big to get through them, they jam them and block them. Propolis, nightmare, glue them up. Holes, bad practice in your crown board. And here's why I hate them. You drive 50 miles to the heather to put on your clearer boards. You drive 50 miles home. You drive back to the heather the following day, so we're now up to 150 miles, and that's when the screams of rage can be heard echoing off the hills. The bloody bees ain't cleared. Not that I've ever been there. I haven't. Honestly, I have never been there because I don't use the damn things. So, they are what you don't want to use. And this is what you do want to use. Clearer boards. And people will say, oh, but it's another bit of kit. Well, yes it is. But you use this to your advantage. You turn them upside down and you stack your supers on them. It's mouse proof. And you put another one on top of the stack with a brick on top, and you've got a mouse proof stack of supers. And trust me, you don't want mice in your supers. They make a ghastly mess. So that's your winter storage sorted out for your supers, because they'll sit in the garage, quite the thing, and they're cheap to make. Now remember, you can go to the DIY shed, or you could pre-COVID, and no doubt you'll be able to once we all get our vaccine. Buy a sheet of ply, ask them to cut it for you to your hive size. You'll find a rack of pre-cut timber in the DIY sheds, usually Richard Burbridge. And when I lived down in Castle Donington, I used to cycle past their sawmill actually. And you can buy from them lath, which is 10mm thick, which is useful stuff to have for beekeeping. And you can also buy 1-inch type stuff that you can then cut to make the surround. Now this is a brand new clearer board, and this is the top, so the super will be sitting on top of this sheet, and that's the hole that I mentioned, and you're looking at the escape there. Now I checked prices for you. The Thorns list, and Thorns are not always the cheapest, by the way. It does pay to look around for these things. And of course there's always eBay, there's now Wish, and of course Amazon. The plastic circular and the rhombus escapes are £8 each. If you cut the rhombus in half, it'll do one board, going back to there. That's the rhombus cut in half. The circular ones you can actually cut into 4 using a fine saw, so you'll get 2 boards out of them. Or the 10mm strip I mentioned, you can make the 10mm strip so that you've got one strip going that way, you've got one strip, whoops, don't do that, don't want to move you. So you've got a strip going this way, a strip coming that way, and where the 2 strips are almost touching, you can chamfer them off at 45 degrees and make sure you've got an 8mm gap between them, a little bit of mesh stapled on, a bit of glue, Bob's your uncle, even cheaper. Now, changing back to the brood box situation again. When the brood box is over 8 frames of brood, especially if it's a national or a Smith, the issue of another brood box crops up. To me, it's obvious if the bees can use it. If so, you give it. They'll soon let you know if they don't want it. In other words, if they don't start to occupy it and use it, they don't need it. There's very few colonies these days that can't cope with a double brood box. The advantage of the single brood box is easier to find the comb, because at the end of the day you've only got 10 or 11 combs to go through. If you've got a double brood box, obviously you've got 22. However, as always, I've got a dodge or two to help you with that situation, and we'll discuss that another afternoon. Double brood box is obviously home to a bigger colony, and normally they need that space. And at the end of the day, the more bees you've got in your colony, the more productive they're going to be. So, I'm kind of galloping through the year now. We've built our nucleus up, we've taken off some honey, and it is time to think about winter. Winter prep. First and foremost, dry hive with no leaks, especially the roof. You want a good queen, you want a colony in good condition, and your last task, which is really the one that you can do most of, is feed, feed and feed. And I was advised a lot of years ago, if you keep bees, buy shares in Tate and Lyle. So I'm passing that on because you will go through some sugar, trust me. Syrup, which is how you feed your sugar. Winter syrup is a 2-to-1 ratio. Remember we were talking about 1-to-1 earlier? Well, now it's 2-to-1. Crikey, £2 per litre, £2 per pint that should be, or 2 kilos a litre. Excuse me a minute. Talk about on the hoof. There we go. And this time you're not feeding suppies, you are going to feed them until it's coming out their lugholes. Feed, 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 feed. When they have left syrup in the feeder, it's a symptom of 2 possible options. One is it's got too cold for them to take it, but the more likely one is you've fed them and like Popeye, you know, the cartoon character, the eyes of the gauge in the eyes has gone ding, we are full, and that's how you want them. I then leave them until I feel they're either light or it's January, and then I put on Eeks and feed fondant. And I don't care how much is left in spring, because I can always use leftover sugar. And this is what you're looking for in spring. That's a good colony of bees in spring. At the moment, they're not like that. This is a photograph I took yesterday. This is actually a polystyrene hive, although you wouldn't believe it from the propolis that's sitting on top of it. And this is the corner of the hive there. And this is a classic poly cluster. They are tucked against two walls because that is where they're getting the maximum warmth from. They're taking advantage of the warmth in the material. In a timber hive, they'd be clustered as far away from the walls as they could possibly get because the walls are cold. Because timber hives are only 3/4 inch thick. But in poly, they lean against the walls as hard as they can to get the benefit of the warmth. And Bernard Mobus always used to say, bees may do nothing invariably. But there is one truism that I will stake the farm on. Dead bees make no honey. And the other one is take your winter losses in autumn. Now what that means is if you've got a colony that's a bit dodgy and you think might just get through the winter or it might not, don't bet on might. Write it off, unite it to another colony and take the strong one through. You can always split the strong one in during the active season and get the one that you've sacrificed in the autumn back. But if you don't think it's going to make it through, don't try it. You're just going to lose them. And there's nothing sadder than a dead colony. Right. Who's got ownership, Morag? Is it you or me? I've lost track.
It's me.
It's you.
So I pass to you. So
No,
I've stopped recording. I've paused recording now. Let make you the host.
No need. Start recording again.
Well,
yeah,
again.
let's throw the floor open. Can you ask questions in the text, please, and we'll get round any audio problems like that. I've now got to find the text. Where is the text gone? Oh, there we go. Woohoo! There's an eerie silence.
You've got two questions in the text.
Okay. Right, John. When you have got two full supers, it's then time to clear the bees off, and the clearer boards work on the basis of separating the bees from mummy down below, interrupting the queen substance. So they want to move down, and the clearer board effectively acts as a one-way valve. It allows the bees down, but the proviso is after a couple of days that they're not daft, they'll work out how to get back up. So really it's a case of put the clearer board on Sunday, take the honey off on Monday. They're very simple bits of kit, but they are very efficient. I'm just scrolling through the questions.
Just to expand on that, Pete, I understand that part, but you said something about inverting it and it becomes a good protection against mice. I didn't understand that part of where that comes from.
Okay, when I put my clearer boards to use for the super storage, the hole that the bees would clear out of the supers is facing down. It's on the floor, and the bee escape is the supers go on top of where the bees would come out of, right? And mice can't get into the stack. It's a mouse-proof stack. Is that clear?
So you're saying keep the clearer board on permanently to stop mice getting in, but invert it.
No, just for winter storage, John.
Ah, got you. Understand.
Just for winter storage. Yeah.
That's a bit of right, Pete. Thanks.
Right. When do we move from feeding fondant in the winter and early spring to 1-to-1 sugar? Really, when the bees are active again, Helen, and they're bringing in pollen, and you're starting to think about manipulating the colony, you can start feeding stimulative syrup at that point. But you have to be careful and judicious with it. It's very easy to overfeed, and you'll end up making your colony honey bound. Dina, the 3 mile. Okay. When you move more than 3 miles, you are preventing the bees from flying out 1.5 miles and finding an old flight path. If you only move them 2 miles and they've been used to flying, let's say 1.5 miles, there is a high risk that they will find an old flight path and return to the old site, which is the last thing you want. It used to be considered until quite recently that the less than 3 feet or more than 3 miles was a cardinal rule, but in actual fact there are ways round it. What I've done a couple of times as a trial is I've actually moved them 500 yards and got away with it. But the trick is you give them top ventilation to deal with the surge of heat I mentioned when you shut in. You shut them in, you strap them down, you move them the 500 yards, 800 yards, whatever your number is, and you leave them shut in for 2 days. Then you put a big obstacle over the entrance, like a solid board, and you put branches either side. Then you open up after 2 nights shut in, and they have to kind of fight their way out through this barrier. And because they have such a struggle to get out, they realise that they have relocated and they will reorientate to that new location. And that actually works quite well. In general though, if you stick for convenience more than 3 miles or less than 3 feet, you're safe enough. When I mentioned the double brood box, would I do that at the supering point? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It doesn't really matter. The bees will cope with it, no bother at all, if they are strong enough at that point. High damp is too close to wall. You can move hives progressively if you move them under 3 feet at a time. So if you can lash the hives together and just move it every couple of days a couple of feet, that works actually quite well. Question: if people don't want to kill their drones they've been practicing marking on, could use a colour from a different year? Yes, you could indeed, and yes, it would also help show you how drones move from hive to hive. Drones are welcome really in any hive. They don't cause problems. It's possibly a kinder way to do it. It's maybe not as tidy as knocking them on the head, but not everybody's possibly as brutal as I am. Any more for any more? Can hear you, Eileen.
Okay. In the video, when the transfer the meat into the hive, was the frame space went empty or the down of the properly? I thought I saw space for a frame on the right hand side of the hive.
Unfortunately, you're very muffled, Eileen. Could anybody make out what the question was, please? It was to do with moving the nuke into the hive, but I didn't catch anything after that, I'm afraid. Ah.
Hello?
Yeah, you're there, Eileen. Do you want to try again?
Yeah. When we moved the nuke into the hive, I thought there was a frame space left on the right hand side in the hive. I may not have seen it correctly, but I know there was the 11 frames, but I thought it was space and wondered if you put in a dummy board or.
Oh, I got you now. When he snugged up the frames, there was a wee space left.
Yes.
Aye. You wouldn't actually bother, and I'll tell you why. That space is there because there's so many new frames. Once those frames start to get a bit of propolis on them, where the self-spacing touches will actually, the space will actually get slightly bigger because there'll be, a couple of millimeters of propolis on each of the self-spacing. And gradually, as they propolize those combs, that extra space will vanish. That makes sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
No problem at all. It's just because it's bonny and clean. Colin, I can't remember where I got the manufacturer from for the refractometer, but I think it was somebody on one of the beekeeping forums. I would suggest going on to one of the UK forum and just ask. Somebody will be able to point you in the right direction. It's a question that crops up all the time. As I say, they're not expensive now, they're about a tenner. Yes, normally you would examine by rotating. There is an official way of rotating frames. Really, it boils down to how you handle the frames, is how you feel comfortable. Well, if nobody has any more questions, I think we'll round this off and say thank you very much to everybody for your attention. and hopefully you've picked up a few tips. And we'll move on next week and look at, again, managing the colony with special attention to our dear friend the swarming impulse. Sex, sex and more sex. Alright then everybody, thank you very much indeed, and I will say bye for now. And thanks again, Morag.
Bye, Pete. Bye.
Hi, cheers now. Bye bye.